Pastor One, welcome back.
Great to be back, Jackson. It's good to be in studio, starting a new season. I'm excited. I know you're excited. It's good to be here. What's new with you, Jackson, since the last time?
Not a whole lot, actually. We've been getting ready, doing interviews, interacting with people on the streets, and excited to hear you teach this season. How about you? What's new?
Yeah, I've enjoyed the street talk. It's been some great interviews, some really good insights from people right in our culture, what's going on in their heads right now, and I really enjoyed it. But since our last season, my family's moved from Cortland, New York to Greene, New York. So we're still central New York, right? Not a huge difference, but we've just been moving trailers of our things, kind of doing it little by little. No major moving truck. But we are probably the big part of that is we're taking a barn and we're turning it into a house. Mm-hmm. So we're camping for the whole summer. Maybe for 8 months we'll be in a camper. And then redoing a barn. So
it sounds like a very fun project, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's fun. It's going to be huge, tons of work. My kids are just really gravitating to the tear apart stage, so they're just ripping everything apart. And every night I get to see more of the barn torn apart. The exciting part for me will be putting it back together again. So that'll be great.
And you don't want the winter to catch you, are you?
That's exactly right. We got to have some sense of sealed in on the outside and heat, in some sense, before winter.
Yeah, definitely.
Because we do get winter here, don't we, Jackson? That's something
that tell me
you
about
learned. It. So to get ready for the season, you and Matthew have been doing a bunch of interviews. Mm-hmm. What are some of the questions you guys ask?
Oh yeah, questions like, do you believe in the life after death and such? You know.
Yeah. So things like, do you believe in life after death? If you do, or if you were certain of it, right? You even asked that. How would that change your life? With those questions, what are some of the things you guys found?
Well, actually, across people, high school, college students, and young adults, middle-aged, we actually have a big range of reactions, if you will. Mm. So certainly, like a lot of different viewpoints. And it's very interesting the way that people usually think. But they do have a certain sense of eternity, that there is something. It's a big unknown for them. It was very interesting.
Yeah, maybe in a sense, even if we generalize, right? The majority had some sense of a sense that there was something more than this life, right? Mm-hmm. If I generalize, is that kind of true?
Yes, and I'm actually excited about the fact that the biblical statement in that area is one more time proven to be true, that there is a pertinent sense of eternity in human's heart.
Right. Yeah, Paul kind of dives in on that just in Romans 1, just in the sense that creation around us, the things that God has made, the things that we see in creation have this eternal sense to them, that there is an eternal power. There's something greater than this world. There is something more than just nature in a divine sense. And people seem to have that viewpoint. So if we just took in a democratic sense and took a vote from all the people you guys talked with, I think we see people generally believe in an afterlife. I mean, they aren't going to have the same answers, but they generally believe in an afterlife.
And another interesting aspect to it, Pastor, was some of them will say, "I'm not religious, but I do believe in it," and then either by dreams or intuition, they will affirm it.
Yeah. All of us have this inner sense that this life is not all there is. And people try to deaden that, and people certainly don't all believe what the Bible says about the afterlife. Interesting to me, Ithaca is a very pluralistic place. I mean, there's so many different viewpoints, so many different worldviews in Ithaca, and yet still, in a majority sense, people said, yes, I believe in some sense of an afterlife. Yeah, it might be anecdotal, and I think what you'd find, say, take Ithaca in 1922, you would find different answers than 2022.
Yeah.
We went all the way back to 1822. We'd probably find a whole different set of answers again in Ithaca, and across our country, across the world. People's worldviews have changed, but there's still that imprint from God that there's more than just us to this universe. There's more than just this life. There's something more.
Yeah, definitely. In the past, wasn't there more acceptance of biblical principles? Culture is throwing off some of those past influences and questioning what truth even is. So, do you think that with this secular age of multiculturalism, many religions, that there is less of belief in afterlife right now?
Yeah, I guess maybe I would have thought so, and I've looked into that a little bit and done reading some surveys, even just done in the last couple of years. So 2021, Pew Research Center did a survey of the United States, and 83% of us in the United States believe in an afterlife. That seemed like a huge number.
80, yes.
Yeah, 83%. Only 17% don't believe in an afterlife. Mm-hmm. Now again, I think in former centuries, what the afterlife was and what they believed about that would have been very different. I think there would have been more of a biblical viewpoint on what the afterlife is, and that's going to be different today. People aren't going to have a foundation to say, I believe maybe what the Bible says about the afterlife, but still 83% of the people in the United States in just the last year still believe in some sense of an afterlife. And in a secular age, you would expect the abandonment of that concept. That liberalism wants to abandon a concept of a divine nature, of an eternal soul. Communism wants to abandon the concept of an eternal soul. That all you have is this life. Get the most out of it that you can. Do everything you can do today to get the most for you. I mean, that's kind of the worldview.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you mentioned that about your research, and because I actually wanted to ask you what that looks like from a global standpoint. Beyond our zip code, if you will. So international, it's very staggering,
Yeah, in the United States, 83%. I thought, well, that's going to look different in the world. You've got countries like Russia and China, and so an international poll, Ipsos did an international poll just in the last decade, and they found that 82% of people worldwide still believe in an afterlife. Only 18% don't. Mm-hmm. Almost identical to the numbers they found in the United States. And it just points again to that inner sense that there is more to this life than just our natural world. You see that across cultures and across nations, across families, across nationalities, as well as faith systems. And so the answers on the afterlife are going to be different, but across cultures, there's this huge sense that there is something more. And I love your interviews because they ask the question, if the person was sure there was an afterlife, would it change how they live today? And I think that gets down to that, in a sense, most of the people you guys talked to said, well, yeah, it would change how we live today. Maybe we'd want to do something that was meaningful, something that mattered, something that would count. And that just, it focused me in on the idea that we all know, just like you mentioned, we all know that death is inevitable. It's coming. I've never met someone who came back from the dead, right? That defeated death. The only one that I know that did is Jesus, and we'll talk about him this season.
Definitely.
But none of us can conquer that. There's always this inevitable that eventually, at the end of our life, is death. In the second National Treasure movie, I like Nicolas Cage. He's kind of wrestling with this riddle, and he's trying to figure out what the next clue is. and he makes this statement that death is the debt that all men pay. Everybody, like no one gets away without it, and death is inevitable. No one is exempt, and we might not all agree on what the afterlife looks like, but on Street Talk, you and Matthew talked about that, and you made the statement that often people live in a denial of what they know to be true. So they know their own mortality is here. They know eventually they're going to die, but they almost live in denial of that. And I thought that rung true, because in the questions, people would say, well, yes, I would do things different. I would want my life to matter. I would want it to count if I knew for sure there was an afterlife. We all know we're going to die.
In Pastor One, we actually had one of the reactions was some people say, I would rather that there is not.
Yeah, so, that's an interesting one.
Like you mentioned, they want to live in denial because, if there is,
sure.
What about taking it in consideration now?
Sure. Yeah. That is a good point. I'd rather that it was not, because I guess that means you've got to answer for your life.
Yeah.
And if I have to answer for my life, then I better live it in such a way that it actually mattered for something. Get this concept. The world wants to kind of throw away good and evil and say, well, all things can be good and all bad things can be good, and it just matters to what is good for you and what is good for you, and it's all relative, except when you talk about death and actually answering for your life. And then people wanted to live their life good. But it kind of contradicts the worldview. But in the end, death is for sure. And so people do live in denial of that reality. We all know death is coming, so why wouldn't we want to live in a way that made our life matter today anyway?
Right.
Because we have a very limited time to use our life.
Right.
Season we kind of dove into the reason for death. Nobody can escape it. That debt that all men pay, that Nick Cage said. Because in every generation, mankind chose their own way. It goes all the way back, biblically, all the way back to Adam and Eve, and we see the results of it in every generation. You can see it in a young child, who we'd like to say a baby is innocent, but at very early age, we notice that babies are very selfish, very focused on themselves.
I have a nephew. I understand that.
Yes, that's right. That's right. You tell a child one thing, and if they want something different, they do what they want. And you see that in every generation. We want our own way. Today, we want our own truth. We want our own morality. We want to make ourselves. One of the people you interviewed said, well, Matthew asked him, well, what is the standard of good? And he said, well, I am. and that's what people want. We want our own right and wrong. We want our own control. And every generation has. And so inevitably, we chose our own way. We didn't follow God's direction. And so death became the result. He created perfectly, and we took the perfection. And in every generation, we've indicated and shown that we were going to do our own thing instead of following God. And the problem is sin. The problem is imperfection. And that leads to sickness and to death and to suffering and all the things that we see in our world around us. The long-term problem of all that is separation from God. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of delved right in on that in the first season.
Right. Here in Gospel Reminded, we actually believe that this life is not all there is. And we actually, the theme of our ministry is living in a passing world with an eternal perspective. So we do believe that there is a future, that we are eternal. Now, even though people we interact with on the streets, they don't believe that there is a life after death. So, but this is our position as far as eternity.
Right, yeah. Yeah, just in our own perspective. So we're coming from a biblical foundation. We have a worldview that's founded on what God has handed us in His Word. And it confirms. It was like we looked at first season. It sits with and follows the direction of what we see around us. It's not blind faith. It is a faith in a worldview that matches exactly what we see in the world around us, exactly what we see in people's hearts, with what we see in creation, with what we see in history. It all matches the foundation that is in the Bible that people wrote over 66 different books, many different authors, several thousand years. That the Bible was written over, and in the overarching main thrust and point and focus and driving force of God's word all matches all the way through. And that just doesn't happen. Kind of like evolution. Things, you don't take a box of bolts and shake them and it becomes a roller skate or a Matchbox car. There's a designer. And so we see a designer in the world around us, and we see the worldview of the Bible that matches the design we see in the world around us. And so coming to the topic here that we've been looking at, we have the presupposition that death is real. It's not some psychological construct in our heads. No, there will come a time where our physical bodies will die. And that's the bad news. And we looked at the reasons for that last season. But we also believe there's an answer to that, and that God has given us that answer, and we call that the good news. There is good news. Yeah, there's bad news, but there's also good news. God gave us an answer. He didn't let us stay in a world that would rot away, in a society that would fail, in suffering that would make us despondent. He didn't leave us there. He gave us an opportunity to have more, and to have an answer for that. Good news. Gospel, right? Gospelly minded is our name. The word gospel simply means good news. That's what it means. And so in this second season, we want to really unpack that answer, God's answer. We want to unpack that good news. We want to explain what the gospel means. And so the gospel is God's answer to death. It's God's answer for meaningless life. It's God's answer for loneliness. It's God's answer for suffering. It's God's answer. And so we want to dive into that and look at, well, how does this matter to the afterlife? And people are asking that question. People have so many different viewpoints. What does the Bible say about the afterlife? What does it say about God and how He gave us an opportunity for how to address that future that's going to come? How do we live in a way that matters? Mm-hmm. People said, if there is truly an afterlife, I want my life to matter. Okay, what does the Bible say about that? How can we live a life that truly matters? How can we live both for today in a way that matters and also for the future in a way that matters? How can we live in a way that has purpose? And so we're going to touch on those type of things as we dive into this topic. We believe on Gospelly Minded that Jesus is the answer. And so we're going to dive into that. We want to look at who He is as a person, what He has done for us, and how it affects us today. Paul the missionary, the apostle, took this good news to the world of the first century. In Galatians 2:20, he says this: God the Son loved me. And he's speaking personally himself. God the Son loved me and gave Himself for me. And I can say that same verse in the first person, said, God the Son loves me, right? Mm-hmm. And He gave Himself for me. And so we want to look at that this season, and we want to dive in. What does that mean? How does that affect us? What does it mean for us today? What does it mean for us in the future? Mm-hmm. And we don't need to be lost in a dying world. We can live, really truly live, and impact this world in a way that is living and true, and live into the next world, into the afterlife.
Yes, definitely. And if you were to give the audience an outline about this season, how would you put that?
Sure. What's it going to look like? So here's a rough overview. Just kind of look at what are we going to talk about. I want to talk about who Jesus is, and we'll kind of focus in on John 1 and John 3, but we'll bring in a bunch of other passages. and just look at who Jesus is. And I outline that as kind of episode 1, talk about who Jesus is. But as I think about that, that's such a big question. Maybe there's a 1A, 1B, I don't know. Maybe
and we'll have certain reactions too.
Yeah, and you're going to do some interviews,
yes.
and that'll really help us. So who do people say Jesus is? Who is Jesus? What did Jesus say about himself? What did his followers say about him? What did the eyewitnesses say about him? Let's talk about who is Jesus. And then we'll go into what has Jesus done. So what did he do, and how does that matter? And so really look at some passages, Romans chapter 5, and talk about what did he do for us, and why does that matter? 2,000 years later, why does it matter for us today? I want to talk about the meaning of the good news. So I've mentioned that a couple times today. Gospel, and it means good news. What is it? What is it? What's entailed in that? What are the essentials? So we're going to trust in Jesus. If we want to really believe in who he is and what he's done, what are the essential things that we ought to know and embrace and engage with? So we're going to talk about that. And then in the fourth segment, talk about how about us? Like, what does this matter to me, and what can I do? And there's a couple words that get tossed around in church world, repentance and faith, and there's all kinds of there's just a lot of consternation on that. Not everybody agrees on it. Can you imagine? Christians that don't always agree. So I just want to dive in on that and then use just normal language. What does it mean? What is it? How does it affect us? And where does that fit into this good news? So how does that fit together? And then what are some barriers that keep us from faith? I think there's some barriers that come up in the Bible that we can look at. Then there's some just general barriers out in culture, in philosophy, in the world around us. And we want to look at some of the barriers, reasons why some would reject Jesus. So why wouldn't I believe? What are the things that keep me from it? Sometimes it's simply Christians that aren't living in a way that Jesus lived. We can be the barrier, and we want to talk about that. Maybe in the segment 5, maybe there'll be a second episode fit in there. How can believers take away barriers? So when it comes down to it, it's me believing in Jesus and not kept away by all these other things. So we'll take a look at that. Segment 6, I want to look at what is the gospel in a nutshell. So, and maybe some strategies. How can we share the truth of the gospel? How can we share that good news? Segment 7, dig into, aren't there other ways to heaven? How many other worldviews are there? How many other views on the afterlife? And we saw that just in our interviews.
Yeah, and usually, sorry I interrupt that. Usually the objection that we face is, why do you want your way to be the only way? That's what I would...
Yeah, and it's really not about us. So yeah, what does the Bible say about that? How does it fit into, are there many roads? I mean, there's lots of roads to Rome. How about heaven? And even the idea of not everybody believes in a heaven, they might believe in afterlife. So aren't all viewpoints equal? Are they all the same? What does the Bible have to say about that? And then in segment 8, I like the concept of what does culture say and what does Jesus say? So that Jesus doesn't always agree with culture. Jesus always agrees with the Bible, but he doesn't always agree with the opinions of other people. So we want to look at that a little bit.
And, not even with the religion of his time.
Exactly, yeah. We're the most, and we could take that into today, right? The people Jesus had conflict with the most were the religious people. And sometimes I think religious people are the people that keep us, Jackson, me, others, from trusting in Jesus. And maybe you looking at that today, maybe some that are watching this morning. often as believers, Christians, church people, religious people, when we make religion more important than Jesus, we keep people from Jesus. And that's something we want to look at. But what does culture say? What does Jesus say? And then look at that worldview. So, yeah, here's some of the things we're going to dive into. What do you say? Should we jump in next week?
Oh yes, definitely. I'm excited and can't wait.
Yeah, let's find out some more. Let's really look at who Jesus is and what God has done for us and this answer that he's given us. So see you next week, Jackson.
Yes, definitely.